When it comes to survival horror, there's plenty of go-to games out there, at least for systems newer than the 8-bits. Games fondly regarded for not only setting the path, but coming out on the right system at the right time and getting all the traction. But for those pioneering home computers, the pickings are kind of slim, at least at a first glance. But there's one game I feel deserves a much larger place in history: Project Firestart. Project Firestart was developed by Dynamix and published by Electronic Arts in 1988, seeing release for the Commodore 64 and the Commodore 64 only. This might sound odd, especially for a game developed and published in the US, but fate would ultimately be against it. You take on the role of John Hawking, a troubleshooter for the United System States. You've been ordered to investigate what's gone wrong with the Prometheus, a ship situated around Saturn and is the home of the titular Project Firestart. This project was launched to produce strong labourers to assist with mining for resources in the harsh environments of deep space. Whilst the project has had some early successes, all contact with the Prometheus has been lost and the worst has been feared. Your mission is to board the ship, make your way up to the labs, then recover the project's logs. After that, you'll have to head to the bridge and set the ship's self-destruct, before legging it back to the docking bay, before the Prometheus goes kaboom. The intro really sets the scene here, offering up quite a neat vibe from its pacing and direction. I really felt it enough to get you feeling tense as the game begins, setting you up to be exactly where Dynamix want you to be as you take control of John. When starting the game's development, one of Dynamix's major goals was to challenge that iconic early Electronic Arts advert, where instead of seeing if a computer could make you cry, they instead wanted to see if it could create fear. And as the game starts with Hawking entering the docking bay, things do seem quiet. Too quiet, in fact. But this sense of calm is necessary to ground you ahead of the challenges John will face. Ones which you'll see as you exit the first elevator. Project Firestart aims to deliver its story with a cinematic approach, driven primarily through cutscenes. It's one which feels quite fresh by 1988 standards, especially for those of the Commodore 64 and its library. As not only do you see ones for actions which you personally undertake, but there'll also be moments where the game chooses to focus on events occurring elsewhere on the ship. These contribute to making the Prometheus seem more alive than you'd expect as a location. Though it's not a large ship to explore, I certainly found it possible to get lost, especially when finding yourself on the run, trying to get to a location quickly. With the hard 2-hour deadline enforced by Mission Command, the sense of tension and pacing is deliberate, and I found it went a long way to making things feel far more dangerous than you'd expect at any given time. The gameplay itself is viewed from a side-on angle, for the most part anyway. Whilst the corridors are commonly set up like this and you'll spend a lot of time there, they don't offer room for vertical movement. On the other hand, individual rooms thankfully offer a different perspective which does give you some more room to move about. They're also set up as separate screens, and each needs to be loaded in as you move between them. That shouldn't be a surprise though. It is a Commodore 64 game developed in the US after all. There's a lot of game for your 4-disc sides here, even if most of that is taken up by the game's cutscenes. I do feel one of the big stumbling blocks at first is getting to grips with how the Prometheus is laid out and connected. The map of the ship included with the documentation isn't the most detailed out there, but it is enough to let you understand how to get your way around, along with giving you the route to your initial destinations, as outlined in the briefing. though being able to commit as much of it to memory as possible is very handy for when trouble does eventually strike. And I mean very handy. Which makes it quite a relief the controls work as well as they do. Project Firestart is primarily controlled using the joystick, though there are some key commands available for reviewing your inventory, saving or loading your progress, changing between weapons, or toggling a few other options. When coming up against something you can interact with, you'll be shown a prompt for which action to take in the status panel at the bottom of the screen. In most cases, you can just press fire here to select the action, while in others, you'll be able to scroll through your options before pressing fire to lock it in. I found this to be an intuitive interface, and personally appreciated it as one which is far, far better compared to what many other action-adventure games of the time used, especially when it came to managing your inventory. The last and probably most important detail is using your weapons. Providing you're not in range of something which triggers an action prompt, pressing fire will fire a shot from your current weapon, launching it in the direction you're currently facing. Unsurprisingly, this is quite important as you'll eventually run into trouble. The kind of gross trouble which will kill you flat if you're not careful. The results of everything which has gone wrong on the Prometheus. Those moments when the silence of abandoned hallways is replaced by the music which indicates a threat certainly causes the tension to ramp up. Just as the victory ditty for when the last in a group is dispatched just happens to give you that moment of respite to let off a sigh of relief that you're safe for now. Ultimately though, avoiding these creatures is the best way to survive. Partially because you ultimately want to conserve your weapons, but more importantly because it's just way too easy to be hurt by them. All because your hitboxes and theirs are a little too large. It also doesn't help when you're trapped in a corridor with no real room to move, as sometimes you've got no choice but to take even more damage just trying to outrun them and move through a pack of them. It's not just about surviving contact with the experiments though, but you're also going to need to be checking in with home base via the radio situated on the bridge. It is simply just to report in on your progress, but also to keep them reassured that everything is under control. At least so they don't go and launch a strike in your general direction whilst you're still trying to solve the situation. It should also be no surprise that sometimes you run into moments where things just go pear-shaped, and for when they do, the game gives you a fairly powerful save system to let you save your progress at any time without needing to restart the entire game should you lose the game. Considering just how quickly you can be killed, this could really save you from using a few too many expletives in frustration when it happens. One of the biggest strengths with Project Firestart is in its length. In being designed as a Commodore 64 equivalent to an interactive sci-fi horror movie, it happens to be a game which doesn't overstay its welcome. The time pressure imposed by the mission's requirements happened to make it one in which you can make plenty of progress within a session, or maybe even getting a complete playthrough done and seeing the ending in the process. Which makes it a genuine shame that its place in history is as a relative obscurity. There's always a case when striking out to do something which hasn't really been done before that it's not necessarily going to stick to the landing. Project Firestart had a protracted development period, lasting for some 2 years, so the choice to focus on the Commodore 64 as its lead platform might have made sense when it started, especially coming off the lack of success found from Electronic Arts' early Amiga push. By the time it finally made it to store shelves in 1988, the conditions of the market had changed quite significantly, making this less of a wise move than first thought. Particularly with the ending of the agreements between Dynamix and Electronic Arts, it resulted in neither party really showing much interest in it by that point, either in terms of a marketing push or considering adaptations to other platforms. As the first game in Dynamix's attempts to go beyond their 3D action game roots, it's an interesting attempt at trying something different, with it laying the foundation for the more conventional adventure games they develop in the following years. It's also been one which I've always been curious about, ever since I saw it covered back in the day. I'm glad that I never tried to get a copy of it back then, as I don't believe that I'd have had the patience to really give it the time it deserves to let it sink in properly. From its lengthy loading times to the awkward nature of combat, there are plenty of little details that would have turned young me off had I tried it back then. But now, with an open mind and many more years of gaming experience under my belt, I really think it's an absolutely interesting game, and one that I think you should absolutely consider taking a look at. Especially if you choose to play it in a darkened room, in the evening, with a nice bowl of popcorn by your side, and especially at this time of year, the spookiest time of year. Because, let's face it, what's spookier than trying to run away from giant green space mutants who can replicate quickly and slaughter you in moments just by getting close to them? And I'll leave you with that thought as I wrap things up, and as always, just say thank you very much for watching.